Alright guys, we're here today, and I thought we'd talk about the Rampart and the potential gentleman's agreement, or the actual gentleman's agreement that's come into effect over the last few days, because it's been talked about a lot over the last week since Luminosity Gaming won CWL Fort Worth, with Classic pulling it out. We're going to look through some statistics in a second, and well, it has been called for to be gentleman's agreemented. I've done a few videos along similar lines here, but I thought we'd do one again. Typically, I am somewhat sympathetic to the pros, but in this situation, I'm pretty much siding with the community, because I think the pros have taken it too far, as it tends to happen every year really. So anyway, if you guys enjoy, subscribe if you're new, as always. I greatly appreciate it. If you didn't see yesterday's 10k Q&A, a lot of people really enjoyed that, so if you want to watch it, I'll leave it linked down in the description box below. So let's get right on in with it here, guys. So yeah, Luminosity, of course, they win CWL Fort Worth. Classic was the real one, revolutionizing the meta. Of course, you could put it on the back of Killer, because Adam Killer Sloss, former world champ, was using that back in the early part of the game. And then Classic really made it meta here at this event. And it's an interesting situation because the Rampart has been pretty good the entire time if you think about it. It only took a small buff to the Rampart, so they increased the range from something like 37 meters to 40 meters, the 4-shot kill range. So a tiny difference, really not much at all. People started using it and finding actually this Rampart is pretty damn good in the right circumstances. So Classic pulled it out. We'll have a look at some stats in a second here. So thanks to JP Krez for putting these things on Twitter. So at Fort Worth, LG's respawn record without the Rampart was 5-5, and then when they pulled it out, they went 8-1. So of course, LG have not been in favour of GAing this weapon. So a gentleman's agreement effectively is when the pros come together and decide, okay, this thing is either too powerful or we don't want to play with it for either the purposes of competitive integrity, or sometimes for purposes of, well, you know, arguably for keeping the game entertaining, but at the same time, arguably keeping the game the same way it always was and maintaining the status quo, which is something I haven't really talked about too much on this channel when we're talking about gentlemen's agreements, but I do think it is relevant this time around here. So JP also mentions the KD of Classic. He had a 1.29 over the 5 respawn maps that he used the Rampart. So of course, at the end of the tournament, a lot of pros were talking about, damn, this Rampart meta is pretty damn good. Splice were pulling it out against LG when they played. Aqua had it in hand as well. One of the real good things about the Rampart is that it has FMJ2 on it as well. So it can wallbang very heavily, and a lot of people were talking about, okay, maybe the FMJ2 attachment is too strong. It makes every gun look like, it makes every wall look like paper. And yeah, okay, maybe that's a little bit too strong, but the gun itself doesn't seem ridiculous. I'm going to be talking about exactly why. So let's go through some initial pros reactions here. But before we get into that, this is from the CWL handbook for the 2019 rules. You can see the collusion includes, now collusion is obviously a negative thing that you're not allowed to do. Collusion is defined as any agreement among 2 or more participants and or persons to disadvantage other participants, which maybe is why they can get away with this, because it's not technically disadvantaging other people, even though I guess it is in terms of disadvantaging LG because they were really good at it. But anyway, agreeing to a rule set outside the rules is supposedly collusion. Now, I did mention this before, how supposedly the idea of gentlemen's agreements, especially with how public the pros are with it, the fact that things are getting GA'd left, right and centre that they can't use, you'd have thought that MLG and the CWL might even step in at some point here. Apparently it seems like they can, but they don't for whatever reason. So John tweeted this out a couple of days ago, and then we have some tweets going back and forth between Clayster and the likes of Classic and Parasite that we'll have a look at here. So Clayster says the following: I enjoyed running the Rampart the few days I did because the gun is insanely good. Pre-aiming it beats any Sorg or Maddox close mid-range, and if you hit the first shot on an ICR long range, their reticle goes to the heavens because of the massive damage equals massive flinch. So good. Parasite says the following as well in reply to Classic: do people actually think the Rampart is uncompetitive? Of course, this is the guy who really got this thing used. FMJ2 specifically is pretty awful. FMJ in general is pretty lame, and I never believed shooting people through walls to be competitive. The Rampart itself is just really good. 50-yard 4-shot kill, does more flinch damage. FMJ 1-2 can get pretty out of hand with multiple people. Classic then replies, yeah, I agree that FMJ isn't competitive, but the Rampart isn't a do-it-all weapon like the Maddox. And Parasite says, yeah, to an extent, its 4-shot kill range doesn't really help its case. If you hit 3 shots, it makes every other gun kill you in 1 shot. It's kind of why the Swordfish was looked at. It does a ton of damage. Personally, I wish FMJ wasn't a thing altogether. Let's go through this then. So we'll just start with this clip from Classic suggesting that it has been attempted to be gentleman's agreemented and that they're potentially getting blacklisted from scrims. This is a common tactic that some of the pros will use where, well, if most of us want to use this don't want to use this particular weapon, say, but you still do, we just won't scrim against you. We'll just, no, we're not playing a scrim with you if you want to use the Ramparts. Like, we're just going to refuse to give you any practice if you decide not to agree to our recommendations, I guess, of what the rule set should be, which seems pretty obvious collusion, but I guess that's just how it is. So I think that LG have effectively, in order to keep their practice up, been forced to agree to this gentleman's agreement if they are to get practice with the other pro teams. So, well, that's questionable at best.
It's only one guy.
Oh, scrim's been going? We haven't scrimmed once. Got blacklisted.
Blacklisted because we're not GAing the Rampart. Yeah, they're trying to GA the Rampart. We're not allowing it.
Was oh, they.
Am I allowed to talk about that?
This is a Reddit thread, so there's some comments you can read through here as I'm talking about this potential change. So, okay. Gentlemen's agreements are on the surface necessary in the current state of Call of Duty because Activision and Treyarch are not incredibly quick to respond to issues that the pros have within the game. For example, IJAX, for example, Talk, when the game first came out, these things were not banned in the competitive rule set. We don't really want people running around with riot shields and the like. We're quite happy for that stuff to stay out of the game. But as it usually happens, last year, they gentlemen's agreemented long barrel on the bar, for example. A similar thing this time where I think they're going too far to some degree. Of course, they're fundamentally necessary to some extent, especially because the game is designed for public matches and designed the fact that, it takes a couple of months at least for Treyarch and the guys to respond to the demands of the pro players. So, they really need to get rid of some stuff on the surface. However, as I say, I think it's gone a little bit too far this time. One of the examples I like to use is the ITRA from World War II. They introduced that gun about halfway through the game. It was very, very strong indeed. A 4-round burst weapon, just like the M8. And Brian Saint, the United coach at the time and still is today, was saying that when they were scrimming search and destroy, it was basically 4 ITRAs on the map, or 8 ITRAs on the map, 4 for either team, maybe 3 at a stretch. So of course, if there's a gun which is so good that it's going to diminish the gun variety of the game, then I'm not opposed to that being removed. Of course, last year's meta was honestly not too bad. We had a 3-gun meta again, the STG, the PPSH and the bar, but if the ITRA was in the game, you'd have probably only seen PPSHs and ITRAs. So I'm quite happy in that circumstance for the GA to come into effect. The Rampart is an entirely different story right here. This gun is not the do-it-all gun. Let me posit this for just a second. Say that the Rampart was the gun that everyone was using from the start of the game. The Rampart was in the meta. It was, 2 Ramparts, 2 Sorgs and an ICR, for example. And then the Maddox gets a small buff and everyone starts realizing, hey, the Maddox is pretty damn good. Oh my god, it has quick draw 2 as well and it has stock. Jesus, this gun's like a do-it-all weapon. Like, how can we have something like this? There's no way we can allow this. I prefer my Rampart meta. We've got to GA the Maddox. It's way too strong. Like, that's, I feel like, what would have happened. Once the pros have decided on the meta they like, which is the current one, of the ICR, of, 1 ICR on some maps, 2 Sorgs on some maps, 3 Maddoxes more generally on most of the maps, they've decided the meta they like, they want to stick with it. The Rampart is not a replacement for any of these weapons. The Rampart is a niche weapon that maybe you could have one of them on your team on some maps. Quite often you would see pros, if this was allowed having one, you can't really get away with more than one because the weapon is not a versatile do-it-all gun like the Maddox. If there's any gun that's too OP and needs to be G8, it's got to be the Maddox, right? This gun's a do-it-all. It can do it at every single range, but the pros are absolutely fine with that, but they're not happy with this Rampart, which, is such a specific weapon because it doesn't have quick draw, it doesn't have stock. Yes, it has FMJ2, and I'm not opposed to, say, GAing FMJ2 as an attachment because, yes, you can shoot through walls very nicely indeed. The Rampart, you have to be so slow with it. You have to set up, you have to pre-aim. If you're pre-aiming, you will shred whoever comes in your way. But you can't have that based around your entire team. You can't replace the Maddoxes on your squad with a load of Ramparts because without quick draw, without stock, you can't run around the map and trade out engagements like you can with the Maddoxes. So the Rampart cannot replace your Maddoxes on the map. Therefore, you're still going to have, say, 1 Sorg, 2 Maddox, 1 Rampart and an ICR on the map if the Rampart was allowed. Yes, it might be slightly strong in certain engagements, but it doesn't change the entire meta of the game, and therefore I see no reason why it should be banned. It's not so strong that it's going to completely strip the Maddoxes out of existence. You can't afford to run too many, as I said, or your team will be way too slow, because you have to really set up and pre-aim with the Rampart as if you're using an ICR. So I really don't see the justification for this gentleman's agreement, apart from the fact that the pros just decided exactly what they want. They want to keep it the way it is, and because LG was doing very well with it, maybe it's within our power to say, okay, we're not going to scrim LG if they don't agree to this gentleman's agreement, so effectively we can get rid of it from the game entirely. That's not something I think should be possible. And I'm not happy with the situation as it is right now, because the Rampart I thought added some nice variety to the game at the current time. I enjoyed the fact that the Rampart could potentially be used and pulled out alongside a Maddox. You know, a guy like Classic was really good with the Rampart, got good with it, and I'm sure other players could as well, to the point where they can be very effective with it instead of a Maddox on certain maps and in certain engagements, but they cannot be as aggressive as a guy with a Maddox who can slide around corners. There's nothing like you can do that with the Rampart. You have to play very conservatively, and it's not completely dominating the meta. It doesn't seem like a particularly powerful gun if you removed FMJ2 off it, for example. So it seems like the pros once again are abusing their position, and yeah, I don't think this should be possible. I don't like the fact that when I play League play, I play a different game to what the pros play. I can accept a few gentlemen's agreements for the things that are too ridiculous, but GAing weapons like this I don't think should be possible at all, at least because they're at least the ones that are not changing the meta significantly. You can say a very similar thing about the Swordfish. A slight buff comes into effect. You can ADS slightly quicker, you can strafe slightly quicker. A couple of weeks ago, exactly, well, maybe a month ago now, when that was buffed, in addition to the Rampart as well, when that was buffed slightly, and then the Swordfish overnight suddenly becomes an issue. Just like in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, when we have the AUG that was reduced in price by $150, now the pros have realized, damn, this thing's actually way better than the M4. Suddenly, several months into the game, or in CSGO several years, but in Black Ops 4's case, several months into the game, a gun finally becomes recognized as being very good, and then the team that actually found that out and started using it gets punished by the rest of the community. In CSGO, yes, you see the community complaining about the AUG, the professional community saying, okay, this gun's too strong, we want Valve and, you know, the guys responsible to deal with it and nerf it to some degree. In Call of Duty, you don't see the pros saying to, you know, Trek and that, you know, can we get the Rampart nerfed a little bit with like XYZ, with like FMJ2 to be less strong? No, partly because they know that Trek won't do that very quickly. But do you see the CSGO pros GAing the AUG out of existence? At the Major, it was the most used gun. They actually adapted to the game. Saint made an interesting point here where he said, yes, Call of Duty pros definitely have to adapt a lot, which I agree with. The new game comes out every single year, different title every year. Of course, the Call of Duty pros have to adapt a lot, but it doesn't mean, like, if you can adapt to a whole new game every year, why can't you adapt to a meta change that happens a couple of months in? And yes, okay, it's only one new gun in the meta, in the rotation. Us fans, I think I'd much prefer to watch the Rampart being on the map than just the 3-gun meta. I really liked having like a 4-gun meta as we did back in Black Ops 3. Of course, Black Ops 3 was helped by the ban and protect system, the fact that you could, yes, you could ban out the M8 if you were Dream Team, Killer's Team would quite often ban out the M8 and ban out some other assault rifles so they could pull out the Man of War, which they were very practiced and very good with. I think that the ban and protect system was definitely flawed to some degree. I think there should have been more base bans, because things like high cal and rapid fire, they got, you know, automatically banned every single time. I think that if both teams got something like 2 bans and they could ban weapons, you know, just maybe not attachments, but just weapons, so you could change up exactly how the meta was played within the game, that would be very good, and it would force pros to adapt to a more diverse meta than they can do right now, where effectively they decide what the status quo is and they can dominate the game, and they can, you know, to some degree make the game different to what we're going to play in game battles and we're going to play in league play. I like the fact that I can pull out a Rampart in league play, or, you know, I can pull out a Rampart in game battles and do pretty well with it, but I'm not playing the same game that the pros are playing, and when I get killed by a Rampart or a Swordfish or whatever in game battles, I'm not playing the same game that the pros are playing because they decide to GA these particular weapons. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this, guys. I definitely rambled on a bit here, but yeah, leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. Yeah, I can leave these links to these threads in the description box below if you want to read through some more community reaction on them. Yeah, like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always, and I will see you next time.